Have you ever thought about how many strawberries it would take to fill up a jar of jam? I did. My sons and I, we started trying to figure out, what do we really want in our garden? What are we really wanting to grow? And the question came up, like, how many strawberries would we have to grow to fill up even just one of the jars that we normally would eat over the course of a month or two? And that's what we're going to talk about today, because believe it or not, gardeners, young and old, experienced and not, they still struggle with planning what to grow in their garden. And sometimes, if you're like me, where experimenting is just as fun as seeing other things grow, you end up with seeds like these. Let's see if I can get that to. No, I'm not going to eat any of that, and this is the people that make it, but I was thinking beyond just what I would eat. I'm thinking, wow, could I buy something, or could I grow something that's usable, that's practical? So for example, I grow loofah, and a lot of people, and might be you as well, think that loofah actually grows in the ocean, and it's a sponge from the ocean, but it's not. It's from a plant. And it's a plant that produces a ton of seeds. It really loves growing here in Phoenix, Arizona. And as a matter of fact, I'm having a hard time getting it to just kind of stop and take a break for the season, because I think I've still got like 4 or 5 on the vine that are ripening and growing. So indigo, if I grew indigo as an example, that is the same indigo that you can make a blue dye out of. So there's so many different things to think about, and a lot of people get very overwhelmed with this piece. What I want to do today is help you break down planning what to grow. Let's get going. Step 1 is to start thinking about what is your goal with this garden, right? Is it food that you want to eat? Is it stuff like I was just talking about, like loofah that you can use? Are you thinking about having wood or bamboo or other products like that are not products, but well, I guess it is a product out of your garden that's usable in some way. So those are things that you should be thinking about as we develop this list. It's great to think about those things, and in the next step, we'll talk about what do we need to consider to make this a sustainable garden. So, and I don't just mean environmentally sustainable. I mean regenerative, but I also mean that it's sustainable and that you yourself can keep up with it. You don't want to start growing everything and overwhelm yourself, and then you either burn out or give up. So when you're considering all of these things, that's one of the considerations, is maybe if you're just getting started and you're learning, to just pick 3 or 4 things to grow, and then you can start adding once you kind of get the hang of it. And you can pick 3 or 4 things for this first growing season that you're going into, and then you can pick different things for the next growing season. Now, it depends on where you're at. If you have 1 growing season or 2, here in Arizona, we have 2, I would say 2.5, because we do have some stuff that grows during the summer, but we can still grow like in the spring and then in the fall. You might not have that option. When I lived in Montana, we had a growing season. So we knew as soon as things started to defrost, like March, April, that was it. Get stuff in the ground, have it growing already, and then be ready to pull it by September, October. And a lot of times we didn't even get that much of a window. I mean, we could still be getting rain, snow into April, May, and snow could start again like in September. So it really depends on where you're at. But there's still ways that you can use like a cold box or a greenhouse. You can start things indoors to take the max advantage of the growing season that you have. So that aside, we want to focus in on what are the 3 or 4 things that you absolutely want to grow. And what I want to do is give you some help. I want to point you towards the Dirty Dozen. There's a list that comes out every year, and those are the fruits and vegetables that have the most pesticides. So they're things like strawberries, apples, your raspberries, your blackberries. Berries are very much one of those. And then some of the other things I saw were like peaches and nectarines, potatoes. So if you just Google that list and pick 3 or 4 things, tomatoes was on the list as well. So pick some stuff that you know you want and that you would like to start with, that you think that you pick some things that you think they're doable with what you've got. And I would even go beyond that just for now, right? We can always trim it back, but just maybe even pick 5 or 6. And then as we go through this whole process, you're going to find, okay, well, maybe I have to pick these 2 and not these, or maybe I can grow these inside. Maybe I can just buy organic for this particular bunch of food. So take a few minutes, pause the video, take a look for that list. For 2025, I'm actually going to put it in the comments. But just know it changes some, but these are pretty steady. Some of these are pretty steady every year. So pick out your 5 or 6 and then come back here. I'll see you soon. Step 2 is adding your support species. So before we dive all the way into that, I want you to think about something else on your list and keep that in mind as we're picking out support species. What the cost is for you to grow, your time and everything, and what is your budget to be able to grow the organic version. So for example, if I buy strawberries at the store, maybe that's $8, and that's pricey to me for strawberries, but I can spend $5 or $15 and buy 3 strawberry plants that will give me that and more over the course of a season. So that's the things that we want to be thinking if you have to drop something off of your list as we go through this. So let's get on this road to thinking about support species. What does that even mean? Now, support species are species that are going to help us build a sustainable system, a regenerative garden. So what we want to not have to do is keep buying compost or keep buying mulch, or we don't want to have to keep amending the soil. We don't want to have to keep buying and spending more, or watering and watering and watering. We want the soil to regenerate and start actually acting like it's supposed to and breaking down like the woods and the woody materials, so that as you're going along, every year it's getting not only easier to grow, but it takes less water, it takes less effort. You're getting higher quality food from your garden. And that's what we want. Now, we want to do that as best as we can from the start. So what we want to pick out are some support species that you can be able to take trimmings off of that and lay it down, and that's going to decompose into your garden and give you nutrients along the way. So a lot of times people will teach, just do this like at the beginning and maybe the end of your season. But what I'm trying to do is create this regenerative system so that we reduce all of having to put all these inputs in. So as you go through and you're pruning once a month, or you're even just like, okay, this shrub is getting out of control and it's one of your support species, so we want it to do that, we're going to go and we're going to trim it down, not kill it, but trim it, prune it back, and lay all of those down so that they can decompose and add their nutrients back into your soil, okay? Those are the things that we want to think about right now. Now, the list is going to vary by the area that you live in, but a lot of what we want to think of are shrubs like a comfrey or a borage or There was a really good one the other day. Let me think. Oh, plantain. That's another one that has and buckwheat. That's a great one that can grow in a wide variety of environments and growing areas. And you can, they take well to being pruned and being able to take that. Well, they don't care where we put that material, right? But we need them to be able to be good if we're constantly like pruning them maybe once a month. You know, they're going to keep growing and growing and growing. So if you can think of any other ones that you have seen, maybe on the roadside or maybe in your own yard that just keep growing back and you're like, ugh, well, here's your chance to turn that into a good thing. Now, if you're going to grow tomatoes, they're going to give you tons, but you also want to have these other things growing. So your nitrogen fixers. Buckwheat is a great one. What else? So sunflowers have a deep taproot. If you can grow alfalfa, that's a really great deep taproot. And those actually help bring nutrients up from way down deep. And they pull them up. And then as you chop them, now you have those nutrients right at ground level. And then it's available to all the rest of your plants. So mustards are coming up in my mind for some reason. But all of these things, you want to be able to make them where they're perennial, preferably, and low maintenance, right? We don't want to have to be out there every week keeping things from strangling some other plant, right? Like tomato. Tomato is fairly high maintenance. You need to get out there probably once a week. You know, trim back the suckers or pinch them off. Make sure it's not overcrowding itself. Make sure it's not overcrowding anything else. When I grow loofah, I have to be constantly like making sure that it's growing in the right direction. Sweet potatoes were the same way. The vines just kind of took over. Things like that. Sweet potatoes were actually really good in that they provided a lot of just extra green and nutrients, material kind of thing, where I could green mulch. That's what we're doing, is we're green mulching with these support plants. Now, the other thing a support plant can be is something that provides shelter from the wind, if you need shelter from a cold wind, or shelter from the sun. For example, my plan for loofah for this coming summer is to plant it going up and over. So I don't know if you've seen those cattle fence, and people are putting them in the ground with like the T-posts, and then you curve it over and make an arch. So if I can get loofah growing up and over from both sides, probably, because they like to grow up, then that could be my shade for the plants that are growing underneath. So onion or whatever else that I have growing there. I've got some redesign ideas going on in my head for my garden because the tomatoes were such a pain in the rear, and I've seen some different ways to trellis them so that they're going more vertical instead of growing kind of bushy, and it depends on the tomato that you pick too, the varieties. But we're not going to get into that right now. I just want you to think about what are the one or two support plants, because I don't want this to be overwhelming. Do you need shade? Do you need wind relief? And do you need greens? So green composting, stuff that you can trim off. Those are the things that you want to make a very short list. Do not go crazy. This is just building blocks, right? We're building a foundation right now. All right, pause the video and let's get back to it. Okay, did you get all of that? You know, I know this is overwhelming, and I've been looking for resources, ways that I can point you, and there's not a lot of good ones, but there are some good ones. I've got some right here, and I found that, you know, some help with planning right now and some help with planning kind of long term, and some are just like, oh, here's what you can grow this month, and here are the same 20 plants plus 10 more that you can grow the next month. And it's still, to me, not quite where I would want it. So that was one of the reasons I have started putting together a way to be able to help you out, a way to take the knowledge that I have as an environmental biologist and then what I know for growing things, which I'm not a horticulturist. I'm an environmental bio, along with classes and learning how to deal with the environment, the growing environment here locally. That's, and there's always college YouTube, right? That's how I'm putting everything together to be able to help you out. But now I'm looking at this going, how can I help you more? How can I help you better? And take out some of this overwhelm and fear and just confusion and frustration. So working on something to put it together so that I can help you out better in this planning process and help you feel more confident in what you're going to grow. All right, let's dive into step 3. Okay, so in step 3, we're going to create our grow list. We're going to take the plants we want to grow. Maybe you took the advice I gave and looked at the Dirty Dozen to choose 6 plants or so that you want to consider. And then we did step 2 where you picked out your support plants. Now these could be plants that are going to provide nutrients from underground, your chop and drops, which are going to provide your green mulch throughout your growing season. Maybe they're going to provide shade. Pick about 3 from there. And they could overlap, right? They don't necessarily have to be exclusive. Example is the sweet potatoes. So now we're going to start bringing that together and thinking about what can you get a hold of? What can you get a hold of transplants? Can you get a hold of seeds? What are you able to get to resource from somewhere, right? Those are the ones I prefer, if you're just starting out, that you would start with transplants. Trying to start from seed is not impossible. And for some people, it's more cost effective. But to have more success, it's almost better if you are planting from a transplant, because then it's already done the hardest part, which is to sprout and get that first few leaves going that'll actually help it to grow further. All you have to do is provide a good place for it to grow. So I want you to start thinking about that. So you might not have it all today. This might be a list that you carry with you until you get to go to your local gardening store, right? Yes, you can go to the big box stores. I don't ever want to say don't go there, but just know they're usually putting stuff out that doesn't necessarily grow in the season that you're in. And so people get really discouraged when they buy something thinking, oh, well, they've got it there. And then it doesn't, because it can't grow in that season. And I've done that myself. I've been very frustrated. I don't want to see that happen to you. So let's take a look at your list now. Here's how you're going to prioritize your list. You want to look for things that are going to give you the longest growing window or multiple harvests. Those are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, and you're not going to be trying to grow new plants all the time, right? If you get it going good, then you can just keep it going, and that'll be the best experience growing-wise, is to look for things like that. The other thing you want to think about is, what are you going to use this for? So do you have jam plants, or do you have salsa plants? What are your plants going to do for you? This, you should almost never, I won't say never, because some of our support plants are just there for beauty. Some of them are there for chop and drop to be able to create the green mulch. Some of them are there for pollinators. We want to attract pollinators. But you want to grow those things that are on the Dirty Dozen that you use on a regular basis, and give yourself the best chance for being able to be successful, because you're more motivated if it's something that you know and you're excited to eat and that you can put to use right away. Now, when I first started growing loofah, I didn't know what to do with them, and I don't honestly use a loofah sponge, so I was like, if it grows, it grows. But I wanted to see how it grew. So I planted it, and then all of a sudden, summer let up, the heat was easing up, and it just took off. And I was like, okay, what do I do with this thing now? And so just yesterday, I had to I was trying to let them dry out, and one of them had gotten some mold on it. So I was like, uh-oh. Skinned it, got the seeds out, got it all washed off and cleaned up, and it looks really beautiful. I was really proud of that. And I took a class to find out how do I put pieces of loofah into bar soap. And so I have that now. So I've found more uses for what I want to grow, or what maybe I wouldn't have continued to grow that, but I have so many uses for it now that I don't know why I wouldn't anymore. Look through your list. Think about the different ways that you can use, eat, preserve, give away. Maybe you can use these for gifts, or I don't know, but you think through all the different ways, and that's really going to help you kind of prioritize which ones you want to grow first. Which ones are you going to grow this year? Let's just focus on learning those and learning all about them and learning how to grow them well in your yard. Go look at your list, figure things out, make your comments about where and what, and then let's get back to it. I hope that went well for you. Now we're on to step 4, where we figure out how much you're going to grow. So remember when I started out and saying, how many strawberries do I need to grow to be able to make a jar of jam? That's what we want to do now. You know what you plan to do with these plants, with fruit or the vegetables. Now you're going to figure out how much do you actually want to grow. So let me run through some examples for you to think about, and then I'm going to have you pause the video again and do some homework. So the first thing I want you to think about is, if you have multiple harvests, that's perfect. So strawberries, for example, will give me multiple harvests of strawberries throughout a season. And maybe I won't be making jars of jelly or jam from that all at once, which would be amazing if I could. But I have a supply of strawberries that I can at least eat and enjoy with my yogurt or whatever else I'm eating, right? But let's think about if you're planting carrots, for example. If you're planting carrots, how many do you actually eat at one time? And then how can you space out the planting of those carrots? Because carrots are not going to give you a repeat harvest. So, and it's the same thing with potatoes. Potatoes was on the Dirty Dozen list. If you plant for one potato plant, at the beginning of your growing season, and then 2 weeks later you plant another one, and then 2 weeks later you plant another one, and you kind of space it out, you have to think about how long they need to stay in the ground. I want to say potatoes are like 100 days or something like that. But in your growing season, can you do multiple plants, or even start them indoors in a container, so that you can just move it outside as soon as it's warm enough and you don't have to worry about frost? Those are the things that I want you to look at now, and figuring out how much, because I might only grow one potato plant to start, but then I might grow 2 or 3 more throughout the season, as long as I have time for them to finish before the end of my growing season. So that's a consideration. If you're planting celery, for example, if you have a harvest of 10 stalks of celery, can you eat all of that at one time? Not really. I mean, I can't. Maybe you can. But what you want to either have a plan for is how to preserve. So for example, cucumbers, you could preserve them. You can make pickles, and then you could have some cucumbers to eat just as cucumbers. Those are the things you want to look at now. How much? And is this a spaced out planting, or is this just how many plants do you want to plant? So for strawberries, going back to my strawberry jam example, I was like, okay, 1 strawberry plant, not going to get very much. So I went and bought 3 more. I don't know if I said that yet, but I bought 3 more because I said, okay, maybe 1 won't give me enough to make a jar. And I'm just talking about a small jar. I'm not even talking about the big 16 or 24 ounce jars of jam. But maybe I can get like a little 8 ounce or quart jar. So if I buy 3 or 4 strawberry plants and then in one go, potentially, have enough strawberries to make 1 jar of jam. And then maybe that will get me through till the next jar of jam, right? And I'm looking at it that way. But broccoli can, I've got broccoli on the ground right now, and I believe broccoli gives you multiple harvests. Cauliflower doesn't. So things to think about, things to consider. How much do you need to plant? And hopefully when you picked your support species, you picked things that were perennials, that you're not going to have to multiple plant, that you're just going to be able to plant it in the ground. Make sure it's watered, has the, good soil when you plant it. And then you just leave it alone, except the pruning, so that you can use that for green mulch along the way. Okay, take a look. All right, time for step number 5, timing your harvesting. So we're going to go work from harvest backwards for how you can time your planting. Now, I want to give you an example of starting from seed and starting in pots as opposed to putting them in the ground. So I have, if you watched some of my videos for this winter, you've seen I have a lot of shade. I have probably, I want to say 5 feet of shade, where it's really hard for things that are not tall enough to be able to get sunlight in that area. And it's along the whole back strip of my yard. So effectively for, 3 months out of the year, I've lost part of my yard for growing. Now, I had some trees in that area, so they were tall enough. I have tomatoes that reached up really high and were able to grow fast enough to get to the sunlight. So they're doing fine, but there are other plants that won't. So where I want to put my artichokes for my spring growing, and I've started them already, my artichokes would go along that fence line. Well, I can't put them there right now. They wouldn't get the sunlight they need to be able to do the growing they need to be ready for spring. So what did I do? I started them in pots. I started them in deep pots because artichokes get really deep roots. And I still have them outside, but I have them on the patio in the sunlight. So these are just little tricks and strategies that you can think about, that maybe this will help you extend out the time that you have to be able to grow your plants. Timing is everything. If you don't get things back in out of the ground before the frost, you might lose some things. Some things can handle it, some plants. This is where you need to learn your plants and start looking at your seed packets. So I have potato seeds, which, by the way, I didn't know you could grow potatoes from seeds, and my sons still insist. They still insist that you can't, but apparently you can. So these say frost sensitive, which means not before my last frost, and they have to be done before my first frost in the fall. 85 to 110 days from transplanting after last chance of spring frost. So I can start them indoors, which is what they kind of infer here from the transplanting. And then I just take them outside. So I'll probably start them in grow bags or something. They take 7 to 14 days to mature, but they don't say it on the front. This is our timing, right? 85, I think I did say that. No, yeah, 85 to 110 days. I'm getting myself confused. This confusing, it's not confusing, but it can get confusing when you have multiple plants, which is why you really need some sort of planner. I love it. They even have where you can put a date sown. Perfect. Now, when you go to create your seed, when you plant your seeds or you put them in anything really, you want some sort of label that you can say what it is and when you planted it. Other information would be great, like depending on how big your label is, does it need full sun or part sun, or how many days until harvest? You know, like when do you expect to have to be able to pull it out of the ground? Like potatoes, sweet potatoes are kind of the same way. You have to wait until, the plant starts to die back. And that's how you know. That's when it's time, there's something underground that's ready to pull. So timing is everything. Make sure that you use whatever you have in your back pocket for strategies, starting indoors, starting outdoors in a pot, whatever, to be able to get your plants out there and growing. So I forgot to talk about your frost dates. What is frost, and can you beat it at all? Well, in some areas you can. So for example, I grow citrus trees. I think I've talked about those, but I've grown citrus my whole life. So I know that when the frost comes around, I have to put a sheet or something over my trees, which means they can't be super tall because I'm super short and it needs to go up and over. But jokes aside, citrus is frost sensitive. So you have to be able to protect it from the moisture settling on them and then the temperatures dropping below 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees centigrade. Celsius, not centigrade. I don't know, does that even matter? Anyways, you want to make sure that you're not going to put plants that can't handle the frost. Like the potatoes said, they're frost sensitive, but I want to say I have some others. I'm doing some planting, if you can't tell. Doing my own planting. This is full sun. That's full sun. And then there's lettuce. Nope. It also recommends planting after your first frost date. So make sure you're reading the seed packets, or that you're going online and Googling what their frost sensitivity is. Can you cover them and they still survive? Some varieties of strawberries, absolutely not, but some of them can survive as long as they're covered, just like my citrus. So that's something to think about. Now, if you live in Montana, for example, I don't know. I didn't try to grow strawberries. I was growing tulips. So it's a little bit different. And the tulips were just fine. They didn't care. They were very beautiful, even in the snow. But yeah, you want to know. The other thing you're going to need to know is when are your expected average last frost date and first frost date. So at the end of winter and probably the end of fall. So maybe December. Like we're in the middle of December, we're still in the 50s at night here in Phoenix. But I can tell you they've already been below zero in Montana and in Canada. So maybe, if you're in New England where you're under blizzard conditions, or if you're in the Northwest where you've just gotten blasted by that all that rain, maybe you're getting frost in New England but not in the Northwest. That's something that you're going to need to look at to find out for locally for where you're at. And then make sure that date is on a calendar everywhere, because all of your planting and making sure that all of your harvesting happens are based on those two dates. Now, for me, because I'm in the Southwest and especially in Phoenix, I actually have other dates that I'm worried about. So yes, I have to worry about frost, but I also have to worry about when does it get too hot? When is it going to be? So like May, June, at some point the soil temperatures get so hot that the plants are going to need cover, and they're going to need ground cover to help keep the moisture in the ground, which is really the big problem. But they also need shade cover. So that's a big date for me, which varies, but definitely June-ish, I would say. We have to have everything covered up. And then mid-September, early October, things are cooling down and maybe soil temperatures are finally getting to where they're reasonable and things can grow. And definitely the sun moving from being direct overhead. I mean, it's not straight up, but 81 degrees is very close to being straight above us. So those are things that you need to look at for planting and being able to plan your timing. Only 2 more steps to go. So step 6 is your space planning. We're finally to the space. How much space do you need? This is a big question people have. Now, how much space really depends on how much you're going to grow. If you're growing 3 different plants, but you have to grow a lot of each one, then you need more space. If it's something that you can interplant, so say you want to grow carrots and you want to grow carrots, in phases, so to speak, staggered, you're going to grow these carrots. These carrots are going to take up space underground, granted, but they're going to expand out. So you want to give them room to grow, but you can plant between them with the younger plants. Just make sure that it's going to, as this one's growing and you're going to be able to pull this out of the ground, that's when this one is going to be expanding out and growing bigger around. Now, carrots don't get crazy. Well, I guess it depends on the variety, but those are things that you can consider in your spacing. Potatoes, right? Potatoes are underground. A lot of these, because they're root crops, you can be growing stuff above that'll grow up above ground, as long as they're not I think it's tomatoes don't mind other tomatoes, but they don't like other stuff in the same family. I can't remember what it is, but my tomatoes are growing fine by other tomatoes. They're growing great with the basil, but maybe they don't like being next to the bell peppers. I don't know. You have to figure that out with your planting and what you're planting. But for the most part, I have tomatoes and they're all growing up above, but down below I have turmeric, I have onion, I have garlic. So those are things that are all within, I think it's a 3x6 raised bed. And you can take up space both ways is what I'm trying to get out here. If you have a tree, is there enough sunlight under the tree during this growing season that you can grow under and around it? And then if you've got shrubs or if you've got potted plants, those can be moved around. I've got vines, and so I have boysenberry vines growing up, but down right underneath the boysenberry vines, I've got other stuff growing because I know the boysenberries are getting all their sunlight up here. So that's not going to starve them of sunlight if I plant something down around their feet. I just need to make sure that they're not going to compete with each other in a bad way, I guess you could say, something that's going to just grow tons of roots and choke out the raspberry. But for the most part, it's with what we're planting, with what we're discussing planting, it's not really, it's probably not going to be as much of a problem. Now, if you have trees, there are strategies to grow trees for small spaces if you don't want the big trees. Now I'm talking about if you grow an apple or a pomegranate or a peach, you can buy dwarf and semi-dwarfs, but there's also strategies on top of that for when you're pruning and how you're pruning that you can keep them small. And that way they don't take up tons and tons of space. So I have a small backyard that I'm growing in, and I was taking advice from a place in California that actually sends a lot of their trees and shrubs this way. A lot of the nurseries in the area buy from them. And they were saying on their website that there is a way you can prune when you're growing season for that particular fruit, to prune for size. That's when you would prune. Now, I am not the arborist. I would definitely do some more research. Don't go pruning just off what I just said, but when the idea is that when the tree is fruiting, you can tell which are your fruiting branches, and that's where you actually want to start pruning for size. So there's lots of different ways. If you plant things closer together, they're more likely to grow straight up because they're competing for sunlight. If you can also trellis your trees. So I'm trellising I'm not trellising, I'm using espalier. It's a growing technique, kind of like grapevines that grow out along these vines. I'm doing that with a pomegranate. I'm just training it to grow out along the lines and in layers so that everything has enough sunlight, everything has enough airflow. You don't want things to be too crowded, but a little competition definitely helps the growth going on. So you got to figure out your spacing. How much space do you have? And how much do you need to dedicate it for these plants that you've chosen? All right, take a look. And next, we're going to talk about watering. So maybe you're just starting out your garden and you have plenty of space, but you're just trying to figure out how much do you want to allot for these fresh vegetables. And the kind of guidelines is 10 to 15 square feet per person that you're growing for. I don't know if that really helps you. It really depends on how you're growing things too and what you're growing. So keep that in mind. That's just some sort of guideline to help you. Now, the other thing to consider is things that are going to need more attention need to be closer to the house and places that you visit more frequently, right? So if you want, let's say your herbs, you can set them up in little pots or you can set them up in little grow beds, however you want to do that. They don't need a lot of attention, but if you're going to be cooking and things with those herbs, you're going to want them fairly close. You don't want to put them, 50 feet out into your property is what I'm saying. You want those within the first 20 to 30 feet, yards, depending on the space that you have. So that's going to be your vegetable garden space, is that first area as you walk out your back door or your front door. That's what you want to be able to be veggie gardening in. Your fruit trees might be among the veggies, or they could be that next area space out where you still want to be able to have easy access. They're still within sight, but they're not as close. They're not right there in your immediate view every time you walk in and out. So planning. And this is especially going to be important right now, talking about water, because you want to be able to water everything appropriately. Trees, unless they're natives, trees take more water, and some natives even still take more water. But most of the time, your natives are already adapted to the environment. They're not gonna be the water hogs. It's gonna be the stuff like citrus. Like I decided to plant 3. I don't know why I did that. I actually have plans to take care of that problem, but we can talk about that in another video. So you're watering. You want to be able to manage your watering as easily as possible. You want timers on this. This needs to be low maintenance so that it can be personally sustainable. Maybe you're one of those people that likes to go out and water by watering can, and that's amazing. Some plants will need you to do that, even with a watering system. But what happens if you get sick? What happens if you want to go out of town, even just for a weekend? Your plants should not be dependent on you having to go out there every single day or every 2 or 3 days. They need to be able to be semi-independent of you. Now, watering, there's 3 types of watering. Well, there's so many types of watering systems, but there's 3 types that I have tended to use. Now, one of them I set up, and that's for indoor use. There's actually a little timed watering things as long as you have like a tub or a bucket of water. that it will just pump that water out and deliver it to all of your plants. So there is an indoor watering system that's possible. And then you've got outdoors where you can actually have in-ground kind of sprinkler systems that you have bubblers or whatever. It really depends on where you're at. And what in the space that you're working with, if you want to put in sprinklers or if you've got like a drip system. I actually have, because of the cement, the way that it's in, and I didn't feel like breaking up cement. I probably will be forced to at some point, but right now, the hose is doing just fine running over that cement place. I put a timer on. It's split off into, I have a splitter. I've got a timer on one side. That's what goes and waters my garden. And then the other side is going to my hose. So I can just go out and I can rinse off the patio, or I can fill up my watering can and give whatever needs extra water, the watering that it needs. Sometimes and this is actually more than sometimes, I will actually hand water first because I want to see, what does this plant actually need? Am I going to put a sprinkler, a little thing on the end? Gosh, I don't know. I can't remember. The thing that delivers out the water. How's that? If I'm going to put one that's a gallon an hour, a half gallon an hour, I want to be able to figure out how much water. Is this a water hog? Should I be putting like oyas in the ground around it to help with that extra watering? I need to learn it. And that might be where you're at too. I have these self-watering planters, and I made the mistake of putting tomato in a self-watering planter over the summer here in Phoenix. That was really bad. That was probably the worst. I couldn't keep enough water between the heat and the tomato being like a water hog. I couldn't keep that thing full. I couldn't even keep it. It was dry more than it had any water. And by the end of the summer, I really honestly thought it was dead. Because it just didn't have enough water. It had too much heat, and tomatoes drank a lot. So this is what I mean. Understand how much each plant needs. Maybe if it's in the shade and it gets its 5 or 6 hours of sunlight, and then it cools down later in the afternoon, it won't need as much water. As your garden becomes more regenerative and builds up more organic matter in the soil, and all of the biotics start really working, you're not going to need to water as much. In the cooler months, you probably won't have the water demand that you have in the hotter months. Those are things that are going to shift and change, and some of it all shifts at the same time, right? So for example, I'm watering every other day during the summer, but in the winter, I'm probably watering every 3 days. Some stuff doesn't even care if I water it. My citrus tree always wants more water, and that's just what it is. But if you can set up a good system, that's why they have these like watering systems that are these kind of grid already formed, that you just kind of drop them in the raised beds. What do they call it? Grow by the foot, I think is what they call it. So you can buy that stuff, or you can make that on your own. You don't have to buy it. It's very hand painful to put all the different pieces together. I know the raised beds I have, I hand built that system. My fingers didn't like me for a good week. But, I love what I did. It just worked out really well. So figure out what's going to work. Do you have sprinkler system in the ground already? Do you want a drip system? Those are really easy to set up, that you can connect to a timer. They make these systems already pre-packaged. You buy them, you buy the extra hose or whatever that you need, the extra little connectors if you have to. I would say go easy on yourself if you can. If you need to and you don't really have a choice but to go out and hand water, at least get a watering can. the hose is great, but sometimes it's a little bit too much on the baby plants. So I would use a watering can just so you can be a little bit gentler on some of these, and then build from there. But the more mature your garden is, it should start to require less and less water, because the organic material built up in the soil, and that's what we're trying to do, right? Is this regenerative garden. It's getting back to nature and how things naturally happen out in the wild, right? You're building up that organic matter. You're helping it to do all of its decomposing system again. The ways that it releases nutrients, the ways that it helps shade other plants. We're doing all of that, but it takes 2 or 3 years for that to really get going again, and then you won't need to water as much. But you still want to be able to have consistency. That's what's going to make your life easier in the long haul and be able to help you stay gardening and stay building a healthier, more nutrient-dense food garden and a food yard, right? Or just your yard in general. We want to be able to make this a regenerative system, and we want it to look beautiful, and that takes consistent watering. Okay, enough of that. Put all your pieces together. Take a deep breath. Breathe in your inner nature, gardening, regenerativeness. And relax and know that you're going to make it. You're going to take one step at a time. And you're going to grow what you can grow. If you can't grow everything on your list, okay. It's okay. You're going to grow what you can grow. Remember, this is sustainable by design. It's going to be regenerative by nature. That's our motto. Sustainable by design. Sustainable means you're going to be able to stick with it. I don't want you to get so overwhelmed or disappointed with your garden. I want you to be able to celebrate your wins. Celebrate that you got through the planning. You did great. Celebrate that when you actually get your seeds or your plants. And this should bring you joy. Like, bring in flowers, bring in whatever it is that makes you happy in this gardening. And know that you have this life-sustaining, health-bringing garden that you're bringing to life. And it's worth pushing through the confusion and any hardness, even if it's just your soil. All right. I hope this helps you. Know that I'm working hard to bring you more things that will help you be able to be a sustainable gardener, that will help you to sustain your gardening. All right. Happy gardening.